I took the throttle and the choke cables and lubricated them. You could see they were kind of down, so the liquid go down inside there. I turned everything back and forth, making it nice and easy when I get these carburetors back on. I bought a complete rebuild kit, came with diaphragms, O-rings, everything. And I tore all the carburetors apart, put them in the ultrasonic cleaner, and then pulled them back out. And once I pulled them back out, I then sprayed them down with air. And then I put a little bit of carb cleaner in certain holes and passageways, and then blew air through that to make sure that all the passageways were clean. So I know all the passageways are good and clean. Next thing I'm going to do is drill out these jets. Now the jets were clogged even after the ultrasonic cleaner. So all right. So the first thing we're going to do once we put this thing back together is put a new needle and seat in there. Right now I put the seat in. There's a washer underneath the seat. It's a crush washer. Make sure you put that back in. Now what I'm actually doing is I'm looking in the passageways, one on each side, to see that the filter is sitting there correctly, because there is a filter right under the seat. And I wanted to make sure that that was sitting in there properly and there's no crud left in there. So we've got the needle and the seat in there. Next thing we're going to do is remount these jets, right? I'm using 3 different drill bits. I have a number 57 for my main jets, and then I have a number 77 for my low speed jets, and then I believe I used a 74 on all those little holes that go into the side. So I started cleaning out the side holes, then I cleaned out the main jet with the 57, which should be about that what was it, 110 or 112, depending on which carburetor I took apart. I believe the 2 and 4 were 110 main jets, and the 1 and 3 were 112 main jets. So I drilled everything out to the 110, and then you could feel that when I was done, the 112s were a little bit looser. So that's what I did. So the next thing we're going to do, once we have that all cleaned out, we're going to go ahead and screw that back in, and we'll put this main jet in and we'll get it nice and tight. Now, I have already, like I said, I have already blown air through all the passageways. I know the passageways are working. Everything's fine because I put some carb cleaner and then blasted it with air to make sure that the carb cleaner came out in a good looking pattern. So now that we have the main jet in, we're going to go ahead and clean out the low speed jet. I used a 77 on this. I believe that's a 16 thousandths. The low speed was a 38. And if I used 016, that comes out to just about a 40. So technically I drilled out the low speed jets, and but that's okay because I can always back them down. You got to remember these carburetors were lean when they first came out of the factory due to emissions laws. So it's not going to hurt it that I'm going to richen up the low speed jets. If I ever put an exhaust system on there, I can give those things a half a turn and should compensate for it. So as you can see, that's a set of jets for a set of drills 60 through 80. So they're super tiny. And then the other box I had is for the main jets. So we get all these things all cleaned out. And like I said, you got to go through the side passages and you got to go through the jet itself. And once we get that done, then we can go ahead and put in the low speed jet back into the carburetor. Now you got to be very careful with these little tiny drill bits. Um, they they snap very easily, so be very careful when you're trying to bend these things around. I do have a drill vise, and I ended up putting the very smallest ones into a pair of vice grips to hold it in place as I push through. So now we'll put the low speed jet in. This is just a flathead screw. Make sure that you get your screwdriver centered so you don't strip it or mar up the sides. You can see that's what I'm doing right now, is looking to make sure that I have overhang on both sides of that passage. So that looks good. We're going to blow it all out. Next thing we're going to do is set our float height. Now this is the old float and the old needle. I'm putting this in just for explanation because when I did it with the new one, it didn't turn out correctly. So I kind of went back out, took it apart, and set it back up. So I bent the thing, and it's supposed to be 7 millimeters. And you can see right now it's about 10 or 11 millimeters. So we'll take it back apart. You need to make sure that it's seated, but it's not pushing against that spring part of the seat. So that's why they say to hold it at, I don't know, 38-degree angle or something crazy like that. You just want to make sure that the floats are seated, that's all. Now this metal tab, you can just go in here and bend it up or bend it down. Um, and you just keep tweaking on it until you get this thing to sit at 7 millimeters, right? So put your needle back across that metal tang, put your bar back in there, and then measure it. And you're just going to take it apart and put it back together until you get this thing at 7 millimeters, right? So you put the slide right on the flat, and then you're looking to see at the highest point of the float. Now I checked both sides of the float just to make sure that the floats were straight and they're not warped. But the other thing, you saw me just push down with my finger. I wanted to make sure that that spring inside the needle was good, and I wanted to see how much movement I had there, right? So like I said, I just did that for demonstration. I had already set up my new needle, and I looked at my videos and it didn't come out right, so I came back out and did it again. You know what? I really love rebuilding this stuff. I love being a mechanic, but this camera stuff is really driving me nuts. I can't seem to get a good picture no matter what I do. In any case, here's the new needle and seat and the new float. We put that all back together, and like I said, I adjusted this a couple of times ago, and so as you can see there, that's 7 millimeters right on the nose, and you can see there that I'm just sitting on the seat. I'm not pushing on that spring tension. And like I said, once again, terrible camera angles, but I'm looking on both sides to make sure my floats aren't warped and one sitting higher than the other. So now that we got that, we've got the needle and seat sitting, we got the float adjustment, we got both of the jets back in. The only thing to do now is to put that gasket on the bottom half and put the bottom of our carburetor back together. So now that we got our gasket seated, we'll just throw in those 4 screws real quick, and we'll move on to something else. Right? Right now, I was just looking at all the gasket and making sure I could see the gasket all the way around and that it didn't fold in. Once I thought the gasket was seated and everything was good, then I went ahead and torqued everything down. I got everything tight. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is the needle. So on some of these carburetors, the needle's actually in with an E-clip and you can raise and lower the needle. In the case of these V4s, it's not. It's set. So I believe this was an 8 millimeter, possibly a 7 millimeter, or a Phillips head screw. And you're just going to put that in and turn it half a turn. So if you hold the needle with one finger and then hold it upside down, it goes in there pretty easy. Give it an eighth of a turn. That's locked in. You just push on the needle real quick to make sure it's sitting where you want it. Then we're just going to push that slide down in there. I'm going to look to make sure that I guided it into the hole correctly. Then there's a small hole in the diaphragm. You've got to line that small hole up with the small hole that's in the carburetor. So I'm trying to seat that gasket in there. I did reuse the old gaskets. I didn't use the new ones. I kind of liked the original ones better, and they weren't nothing wrong with them. So I left them in there. You can see that I'm putting the cover on and I don't have the spring in there. I did this on every carburetor. So I put 2 screws in and I tightened it down. That seated that gasket back into its little groove. Now, do you have to do that? No. To me, it's just an extra precaution. It only takes a couple of seconds, and that pushes that gasket down in that groove. Now, when I take it back off, the gasket should be seated, or I should see that I folded the gasket under, right? In this case, I can see that it seated itself real well, so I'll put the spring in, and I'll put the cap back on. Right? Send those 4 screws home, and then there's one more piece that we have done on the carburetor. Now, I have seen people glue that gasket down to hold it in place, but I don't like that because if I ever have to take it apart, I'm probably going to destroy the gasket. So that's why I seat it and take it back apart rather than try to hold it down with some kind of glue. But the option's yours. Now you can see it's moving up and down freely. Everything's good. Next thing I'm going to do is clean that choke up with a piece of steel wool. I use some fine steel wool. Put the spring on, plastic cover. Slide that down. Then we have the lever and another spring. So we're going to put that spring on the lever. Then once I have that, I'll put a little liquid wrench or WD-40 on that bar, just to keep it lubricated because a plastic slide holds it in place after that, and I don't want it to rust. So I'll just put a little lubricant on there, and that'll be good. So then we're going to try to put these 2 pieces together at the same time. You're going to put the lever in the hole at an angle, and then once you have that in that top hole, now I can put the choke into the slot and then try to send them home at the same time. However, it just exploded on me. So no big deal. We'll just push it back down and try this one more time. Put the lever in the one hole. Put the choke down. Get it to sit in the groove. Once I have everything in the grooves, then I can try to push everything down at one time. So now we got it in there. We'll give a couple turns on that plastic nut. Whatever you do, don't over tighten that nut because it is just plastic. Right. Here's the plastic sleeve. This holds that arm in place, right? Takes the movement that we had to disassemble it out of it. We'll go ahead and tighten that up, 14 millimeter. Just snug is all we got to do. And here we're testing it, making sure that it works properly. Now we look at the needle. So the low-speed needle has a spring, then it has a steel washer, and then it has a rubber washer. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to run them all the way in until they're fully seated. Now you don't want to over-tighten that, but you don't want to stop when you feel it start to get just a little snug because that's that O-ring sitting in the groove. So don't smash it, but make sure that you're not just seating the O-ring, right? Once you have that, now I've turned those 2.5 out. That's what a 700 takes. And everything looks good. Now we'll go ahead and we'll put all 4 carburetors back together and start the second half of this process, which is tying all four of the carburetors back together. So I just wanted to double check all these screws and make sure they were timed right. I turned them to 2 1/4 instead of 2 1/2 because I made my jets uh, bigger than they were from the factory, even though it's a little bit lean from the factory. By opening up those jets, I can close those screws, and I think I'll be in the right spot. And I'll have some wiggle room if I ever want to put the exhaust system or anything on it, air cleaner system, something that would make it a little bit leaner. So here what I'm doing is I'm just getting out all the other parts, the screws, the nuts, the washers, the springs. I did lose one of the springs, but fortunately, one of my rebuild kits that I came with just about everything. So once I get everything out and I figure out what I have and what I don't have, I'll go ahead into the rebuild kit and find the spring that I'm missing. So, um, so I'm just making sure that I have all my choke nuts and choke washers and all that lined up so I can put these things back together. Right? Those are all my old O-rings from the fuel tubes and the vent tubes. Now the fuel tube is a different size than the vent tube. You can't really mess them up. The vent tubes are a little bit smaller, so they'll only go in one spot. Now that I have all my nuts and bolts out and I have my washers and all my linkages, everything's ready to go. Now I can tie these carburetors back together, right? I can put the choke rods on and I can put the one choke back on the bike because I never took that off of the rod. The other thing that I can get ready to do too is put on that throttle linkage, right? So I'll get everything lined up. And so now here's the main carburetor. There's my vent tube. Right? Once again, more nuts and bolts. All right, so I'm just going to figure out where exactly they all go and how they go together. Unfortunately, my camera work really sucks, and I lost a piece of video. The camera just shut off, so I don't have the piece that actually shows you bolting the linkages on and putting those vent tubes and everything back in. I'm really sorry about that. I just, man, I'm an okay mechanic, but I absolutely suck at this camera work. So here I'm looking for a spring. I actually lost one of the springs that goes to the throttle stops, that keeps the throttle stop in the right spot. So fortunately the kit had one, so I grabbed one out of that. There's my main carburetor, the number 4 carburetor. So I'm going to go ahead and put the linkage on there. Don't forget that little plastic insert where you'll have slop in the system. So you get the plastic insert and then you get the washer, and that will tie everything tight. Now, like I said, unfortunately, my camera work sucks and I don't have a picture of tying it together. So here they are together. So, and then here's where those last brackets go. So this one bracket goes on top there, and that's going to hold the heat shield in place, right? I'm not going to put that on. Right there is where the number 4 spark plug wire goes. So I'll leave that off so I can put my throttle cables and everything in. Right now I'm checking the chokes, right? So uh, the chokes all seem to be working correctly. So I got my vent tube on, I got my fuel tube on. Next thing we're going to do is try to adjust or synchronize the 4 carbs together. So the way that the book says is you grab this number 4 screw and you open the throttle plate until you can see the hole. Now you want to make it so that all the rest of them are the same as the one, right? So you look down in there and you can, well, with my camera work, once again, you probably can't see the holes, but that's how we're going to synchronize them is with these screws, and we're going to bench synchronize them first. And then when we put them back on the carb or on the bike, we should be very, very close, right? But we have to start there. So first, I'm going to just make sure my throttle linkage is free and clear and everything works. I'm going to let it snap shut a couple of times, and then I'll go ahead and start my synchronization process, right? So I'm going to turn this number 4 screw until I have the hole just the way that I want it, where that throttle plate is right behind the hole, and then I'm going to adjust all the other carburetors to that same distance. So now I think I have that hole where I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to this carburetor and I'm going to adjust this one identically to the number 4. Right? So I'm going to move that plate open and close. Actually, I don't really like where the 4 is, so I'm going to just fine tweak it and get that hole fully exposed. And now I can go back to this carburetor and get this hole fully exposed. But you have to start with that one with the plastic screw and then match everything to that. Now that I have that one in place, I'm going to flip the carbs over. Here's my last 2 adjusting screws. So I'm going to adjust these screws. I'm going to go in, put my screwdriver in there, and then I'm going to open that throttle plate evenly with the other throttle plate. Right? So now I'll have 3 carburetors that are in time or synchronized. Now I'll go to the last carburetor. I'll synchronize that one as well. And here, now that I have them all synchronized, I'm going to add fuel and see what happens, right? Now, fortunately, I did this because they all leak like a pig. For some reason, the seats that they gave me or the needles that they gave me were no good. So I took the floats back apart. I put in the old needle end seats, and with the new floats, I readjusted the float height. Here you can see all the fuel down on that thing. Really good idea that you try this before you put them back on the bike. So I readjusted, put the old needle end seats in, all the leaks went away, everything is good now. Now I'm ready to put them back on the bike. That will be the next video. So everything should work perfectly, hopefully. And so please stay tuned to my next video. Hopefully you liked what you saw. Once again, I'm sorry about all my cameras, but we'll get everything straightened. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching my videos. I greatly appreciate it. And next week we'll put him on the bike. Thank you.